Hey friends, Joe here at Reverb, and as many of you have probably heard, hell has frozen over and Oasis, after some 16 odd years, is back together. Many of us, especially here in the States, probably associate Oasis with the expert balladry tunes like Wonderwall and Don't Look Back in Anger, but the real fans know that the core Oasis sound is in the massive, multi-layered, in-your-face stadium rock sound that influenced an entire generation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So in a lot of these Potent Pairings videos, we take a look at a very specific effect, or try to approximate that with a similar effects pedal. In this video, we're going to be more taking a look at Noel Gallagher's kind of guitar philosophy, his approach to recording. And it's almost like the approach is the technique. And that technique includes layering guitars, playing them in different octaves, utilizing different voicings of similar chords. So we're gonna have a look at some variations of this technique through the lens of 3 key songs that represent their signature sound and would become a template for the rest of their career. Now, being from Manchester, there's no doubt that Noel Gallagher was highly influenced by Johnny Marr and the Smiths. Listening to a Smiths song and an Oasis song, though, you wouldn't think that this band was highly influenced by this band sonically or songwriting-wise or effects-wise, but it was in something maybe even more powerful, the technique of layering guitars. So, if you've heard Definitely Maybe, you know that this is a young band figuring it out. And they're not yet at the level of clinically insane multi-layering of guitars. They're still very much pursuing this idea of layering. And you can hear it clearly on Cigarettes and Alcohol and Supersonic and Live Forever and of course Slide Away. You can hear what's to come. So in the early days, Noel used an Epiphone Les Paul until he was given a 1953 Les Paul converted to burst specs by none other than Johnny Marr. That's right. Marr gave Noel a 53 Les Paul that was previously owned by Pete Townsend. Johnny used this guitar to write Panic by the Smiths, and the story goes that Noel took this guitar and made a cup of tea and 20 minutes later wrote Slide Away. This is magic. Guitars are magic, and everybody go find yourself a friend like Johnny Marr. But if you don't have $250,000 to afford a 53 Les Paul, or you're not yet friends with Johnny Marr, you can use Les Paul Standard like we're using today, or there's tons of other alternatives and plenty of Epiphones on Reverb for a few $100s. As far as pedals, there's not much to talk about at the moment because Noel supposedly didn't even know pedals existed at the time and there were no pedals used on this record. But there is a pretty special sauce to this guitar sound, and that is the combination of the preamp of a Roland Space Echo and an odd pairing of 2 blended amplifiers. A WEM Dominator Mark II with the bass and treble maxed out, blended with a Marshall Valve State 80V or 80AD. Basically a vintage esoteric EL84 amp blended with a cheap high-gain amp generally associated with metal at the time. So today, we did use our Roland Space Echo, and unfortunately, although we did try, and we tried very well, we couldn't find a WEM Dominator Mark II, and we couldn't find that specific Marshall Valve State. So, for the WEM Dominator side of things, we used a Tone King Royalist, a British voiced amplifier, and for the Valve State sound, we used a Vox Valvetronics. It's similar in certain ways because it is a solid state amp with a tube, so we're here to approximate things. And if we just waited for the real things and we were never able to approximate, we would never get anywhere and life wouldn't be fun. But at the end of the day, this does get us in the ballpark of this fizzy solid state amp blended with this warmer tube combo amp and mixing the two together. And then we essentially have, for the rhythm guitars, we have 3 tracks. We have Noel's open chord, kind of overdriven. We have Bonehead's power chord, no open strings, very tight, controlled. And then we have a double of Noel's open chord voicings, a bit cleaned up. And that created a bit of a chorusing effect without using chorus. It also created articulation and punch, and it is directly influenced by Johnny Marr. Then we have the lead tone. And this was a joy to go after for many reasons. Probably first of all, though, just for the cool factor. The aesthetic of this song on their first record, and it opens up with this tone and basically a guitar solo. And it doesn't seem like it's a song that opens with a guitar solo, but this is so Noel. It speaks to his integrity of composition. His style of soloing or lead playing is subtle. It's tucked in, it's textural, it fits in with the wall of sound aesthetic, and it really sounds like it's part of the sonic family and not out way in front a big thrashing solo. For the sound, we used this blended amp combination and a bit of room tone as well. And that brings me to a point of reverb. There's definitely some room reverb that you can hear on this guitar, but other than that, there's not a lot of wash or a lot of reverb or delay on these guitars, on this early stuff. And a lot of the reverb comes from the drums. And so when we associate that kind of bigger sound with this band or with these early records, a lot of that stuff does come from the drums. The guitars are kind of a bit more dry, driven with a bit of room. By 1995, we get the album that got Noel his own Rolls Royce, What's the Story, Morning Glory. And it's at this album that we really hear the evolution into the heavy production era of the wet, psychedelic, pummeling, yet still somehow jangly wall of sound. This era is arguably the quintessential Oasis sound, powered by Noel and Bonehead's Matsumoko-made Epiphone Rivieras and Sheratons, with an occasional assist by Johnny Marr's Les Paul, and even occasionally a Stratocaster, which, believe it or not, was used on the iconic solo for Don't Look Back in Anger. Epiphone Rivieras and Sheratons are already really affordable on the used market, but you could also look at Harley Benton and Gretsch Streamliner models for similar vintage semi-hollow vibe. As Noel continued to blend amps, he started using some different ones, like a Vox AC30 through a Marshall cab blended with a Blues Jr. He was also known to use orange OC120s with JCM 900s. For today, we decided to use a Vox AC15 through a 412 cab blended with a Blues Jr. 3. We found that this blend of amps, the big cab sound with the brighter, smaller amp sound, in combination with the semi-hollow body layers, just totally nailed the harmonically rich sound of Oasis. So that's what we went for. Blues Juniors are abundantly available for a great price used on Reverb, but if you don't want to spring for a Vox AC30, the Valvetronics models from Vox will get you really close. Okay, so let's take a look at the title track from this record, Morning Glory. This is a great example of the evolution from Definitely Maybe. They're employing very similar techniques here. Noel is playing open chords and doubling, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. Bonehead is being Bonehead, just bar chords, closed voicings, powerful. Noel is playing the riff with a bit more clarity on one of the performances as opposed to just the open chords on another one of the performances, which speaks to another technique of separating different aspects of the performances, whether that's a pick scrape or a bend or a certain riff, in order to have more control and clarity in the mix. Brilliant, and part of the Oasis sound as well. To capture these rhythm guitars, we use the same blend of amps that I was just discussing, but instead of the Space Echo, we used the Echo Drive made by SIB, using it in the same way, not for the delay, but for the preamp. Unlikely that Noel used this on the record, but he used it live, and it sounds incredible. The preamp sounds awesome, and so we decided to go after it, because why wouldn't we use these different flavors that we know Noel was a fan of and loved using? Why wouldn't we try using it as well? It's a blast. Check it out. A new technique that we hear from Noel on this record is the octave doubling. Playing a riff and then playing it in the next octave and doubling that idea. Now, this is an amazing technique for many reasons, but this is, once again, this is a compositional technique. When you octave double, you are capturing all of the natural imperfections that are happening from different performances. Noel used a tube screamer live, so we decided to employ one here for the octave doubling on this riff. Let's check it out. Okay, so we've been discussing this side of Oasis, which is the multi-layering, in-your-face, as Noel put it, making the amps beg for mercy sound, right? Then we had this other side that Oasis is very much signature and known for, is the lighter, more dynamically textured, is still a layered technique, but involves more dynamic and subtle layering. And then we have this song that represents both of those completely and wholeheartedly, and that's Champagne Supernova. One technique Noel employed with this was definitely another Johnny Marrism, which is layering a light acoustic guitar underneath very cacophonous and growing massive guitar sounds. So we started there with the acoustic. So when Noel started to use the Vox AC30 is when we start to hear tremolo pop up in more Oasis songs, like Sunday Morning Call and It's Good to Be Free and Champagne Supernova. And the way that it's used in Champagne Supernova is brilliant. It's single harmonic notes with a bit of tremolo, and when you talk about layers that are so dynamic and soft and just plucking a single note and letting that subtly cascade from chord to chord, that is such a beautiful use of a powerful technique, which is layering, which is where all this comes from. Since we're using the Vox AC15, we have the Vox Tremolo, which we'll use for something else, but for this we decided to use the Boss PN2 tremolo pedal, killer tremolo, used by Noel live, and it was used by My Bloody Valentine often, and it's a highly sought after tremolo. There's tons of great tremolo options on the used market though, so check them out. Okay, so with the sound of the lightly strummed acoustic passing through the chords, the plucked harmonics with a bit of tremolo, a nice dancing lead part by Noel, and a very clean electric just strumming on the downbeat of each chord, all those things in combination with the sound of a babbling stream, and you have the world, the atmosphere of Champagne Supernova. And the last element of this intro and first verse sonic palette was really surprising for me because I always thought it was a melodica, and so did you. Don't even, so did you. It was apparently 2 EBow tracks. Noel played EBow part and then played a harmony, and sounds like it's some fairly high gain to get the EBow sustain going, but just tucked way low in the mix, and so that's what we did. So we start off with this beautiful textural, dynamic, babbling brook, peaceful vibe. And then by the end, as you know, we are in a cacophonous array of all of the things that we talked about, harkening back to Slide Away in Morning Glory with the techniques of doubling and power chords, utilizing different voicings of chords together, layering, 10, 20, 30 guitars probably, have everybody in the band take a solo, including Paul Weller. Bring Paul Weller in here to do a solo. Bring this guy in here to do a solo. Somebody solo low, somebody solo high. And through all that, we still have this beautiful palette that sounds like nothing else. It sounds like Oasis. These techniques would definitely be taken many steps further on Be Here Now and the subsequent records and to beautiful stuff. But what we talked about here today, I think, laid a lot of the groundwork for how they utilized it. And the way that Noel took this stuff from Johnny and how many other artists have taken it from Noel, and how we can take it from whoever and however we interpret it and translate it into our own music, into our own feeling. These techniques are amazing. A lot of them are actually very simple. And so the gear is amazing. The techniques are amazing. In combination, it's magic. Give it a go. Let us know how you feel about this video, and we hope to see you at the next one.